Okay, so now we are recording, and I'll share my screen because we'll be inside of InDesign, the place we love to be. So sharing my screen, going to InDesign. Yes, inside of InDesign, before we start, I'll actually make sure that there are some things that I have out here in my right panels menu, which is character styles, paragraph styles. I also like that paragraph is here and character is here. So those panels are great as well. Text wrap is something we'll be needing. Um, you might want to use object styles. I'm not covering object styles in these videos. You can watch videos on those topics as well. But those are also handy when working with magazines. Um, those are specifically if you want images to react in a certain way when put inside of InDesign, or boxes to react in a certain way, and so on. But to get these panels over here, I'll just quickly show you how to arrange it like that, because we can choose workspace, and the typical workspace will be in is most likely essentials. And if I choose essentials, you'll notice that suddenly it doesn't look like it's supposed to. So what I'm typically choosing is Essentials Classic, because Essential Classic has the things that we'll need, though you'll need to add something. And my Essentials Classic perhaps looks a bit different than yours because mine hasn't been reset. So I'm just going to reset mine as well. And then you'll notice that suddenly a lot of the different panels disappeared. So Essentials Classic is the workspace we'll be using. And just to add the different things that we'll need over here, I'll simply go into my styles. So my styles is located down here, and I'll choose the paragraph style. It's normally attached to the character styles. So by putting it over here, we'll have both of them. The next thing I'll do is make sure that I have my paragraph and character. So I'll just find those inside of type. You can also find them in window, but I'll just find them over here. And I clicked the wrong place, so I'll just find them here. Paragraph, rups, there we go, and character. So I have those two, and I'll just put them together over here on the right. And we'll definitely need text wrap. So text wrap is something I'll get as well. So then we should have like a good panel for working with magazine design. There are also others you can use, but you can find them along as we go along. There's a lot of panels, and one that I told you could be relevant is the one called styles for object styles, but also in types and tables. Perhaps there are some you want as well. If working, let's say, with tables, or if working with specific glyphs for your, yeah, so there's a lot of different things you could need for the right panel over here. I'm just gonna make sure that my tools are in 2 columns, and now we're ready. We're ready. Yeah. So the first thing we'll do is we'll start working with cover pages. So to design our cover pages, and some of you might already have done this, but to design our cover pages, we'll need to have 3 pages standing next to each other in InDesign. So I'll do that. File, new, document. I'll create a document for print. This is for print. If this was for digital edition as well, you could of course have made this for web or mobile, or you could in general just have made sure that it's not in SMYK but in RGB. But let's not talk about that now. But let's say this is just intended for print. The only thing that it will do when it's intended for print is actually just convert the colors to SMYK. But you can ask it not to do so when exporting if you want it to stay in RGB. So you're not doing any damage by choosing for it to be in print. Okay, so let's say, just to make it not tougher on ourselves than we have to, let's just say that your magazine is a typical A4 page. Okay, so I'll just write some random margins down here. Let's say 15 millimeters. But it doesn't matter whatever this value is, because it's the cover. And I don't know if you even want margins on the cover page. This will be very relevant for the content pages, the pages inside of the magazine, but for the cover, it's mostly just to show where perhaps some objects or titles could start. So margins are not so relevant. Of course, bleed edge is, because this is going to be printed on both sides of the paper. So of course here we'll need at least a bleed edge of 3 millimeters. I have a tendency to choose 5 millimeters, but I know that Rege is often telling you 3 millimeters. It doesn't really matter as long as it's somewhere between 3 to 5 millimeters. So, okay, now I have these this A4 document, and the most important thing is actually that I choose this one called Facing Pages. And for all our magazine documents, no matter what pages it is, if it's cover or if it's some of the content pages, we will always set them to be facing pages. And I was talking to a lot of the Danish students, the marketing students about this, and a lot of them accidentally had switched facing pages off, or they somehow had understood it like it was better to use it non-facing pages. Well, just if you think that, just delete that knowledge. When we're working with magazine, we're always using facing pages, at least in 99.9% of the cases. And then if it's because you want to export it as single pages afterwards or spreads afterwards, you can always do that when exporting. So always facing pages. That's just what I'm saying. I'll click create. We'll just make it an A4. Of course, when making your cover, it will depend upon which size you chose for your document, for your magazine to be in. Okay, so this is a page, but what's important is actually not this first page in my document here. What is important is the A master up here. So what I'm going to, just to make it bigger for you so you can actually see what's going on, I'll go into my burger menu, click for in my panel options, and I'll just make the pages extra large and the masters extra large, so everyone can see what's going on. So now we're definitely able to see what's going up in the masters page area. So that doesn't change anything. It's just the pages, so you can more easily see what's going on in the page panel. I just changed that. Okay, so I'll double click on my master and I'll just zoom out a bit, and thus we'll see that we have two pages standing next to each other. We'll need three because we'll actually need the center, the center to have a spine. So that will actually be a third page. There will be a fold, and every time there's a fold, it's an extra page. So to create an extra page in this document, we'll just right click our A master text. Up here it says A master. We'll just right click that and we'll choose master options for A master. Then when inside of master options for A master, we can choose some specific options for this A master. And this, what we're going to change here is the number of pages. We're going to change that to 3. So I'll write the number 3, which I always have a hard time pronouncing. So now we have 3 pages next to each other. Okay, so the one in the center needs to be a spine. There are different calculators that can, calculate how big the spine is supposed to be if it's 100 pages in 80 grams papers. You can just find those types of calculator on the internet. I'm sure Rege has already shown you like 2 or 3 different calculators, and you can just go into that page and just calculate how big your spine needs to be. In order to make the spine, first of all, I need this margin to disappear, because if I want my my spine to be, let's say, 5 millimeters, well, the margin is already 15 millimeters. So I'll just show you what happens if I try to make this this page smaller. So what I'm doing now is I'm just showing you something. So don't, this is just to show you something that's bad. So if I use the page tool, which can be used to resize pages, and hold down Alt, that's the options key, it will simply not allow me to make the spine smaller than the margins. You see that when the margins collide, it will simply just go back to being the original size. So it will not allow me to make a spine that is smaller than the margins. So I'll just make it back to its original size and make sure that there are no margins intervening in this project of mine of making the spine smaller. So I'll go into layout. I'll be sure that I've clicked once on my middle page, and you'll see that the middle page is selected in the pages panel. So and that's because I clicked on it. You know, if this was not selected, if instead I had this selected, I will be changing the margins on this one. If I have this selected, I'll be changing the margins on this one. I could also select all three of them by holding down Shift, and then I'll be changing the margins on all three of them. So just make sure that you're only located on one of these pages. And just to be certain, I always double click that page, just to be 100% certain. Actually, I 10 double clicked. So this way I know I'll just change this one. Then I'll go to layout, margins and columns, and I'll just write 0 millimeters. Because why should I need a margin here? Actually, perhaps I would want a margin to be from the top and from the bottom, which is the same measurements as the margin already. That way, if I write a title on the spine of this magazine or which month's edition it is, then I know where to start the text. Where it's located exactly like the margins on the two pages next to it. Okay, I'll click OK, but it's just important that the margin on the left and the margin on the right is gone. Okay, then I can go to my page tool and actually and just remember, while resizing the page, you need to hold down Alt. That's options. And perhaps I should stop saying Alt because everyone calls it options nowadays. But then I can just resize it to be the size that I want. And you know, it will write, if I have smart guides turned on, it will write which measurement it is. You can see that it just says 6 millimeters right now. And I'll just release it. You could also write these measurements up here. So I'll just click undo, and instead I'll write width up here. Let's say that the spine is supposed to be 7 millimeters. I'll just type in 7 millimeters, and then it resizes. And everything looks like it's supposed to. We have our spine, it's 7 millimeters, and now we're ready to go, making the back page, the cover, the front page, and the spine. These, though, are of course supposed to be printed at some point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these pages down in my physical pages, the document pages area, and I'll just do that by dragging them down there. And I do that while they're all selected. Make sure that you select all three of them and just drag them down here and delete page 1 like that. And then we have our cover spreads. And these are going to look excellent. I'll just go down to these pages. These are going to look excellent when you print them. Of course, you need to put some content on them. I'm not here to discover what content you're supposed to put on them. You can watch some videos about that, and you can read the material that Michael and me handed out to you about editorial design and so on, to get an idea of how to construct a front page of a magazine cover. You can also simply just go look at magazines that different publishers has published and just see how they did it. So I'm not going to teach you how to construct the design. You'll do that yourself. But now at least you know how to construct the cover correctly inside of InDesign. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is make certain that we know how to export this, because this is a bit different than everything else you've made. Okay, I've zoomed in a bit too much. This is different than everything else you made because because this actually consists of 3 pages. I'm just going to give this a color just to and just make sure that it goes all the way to the bleed edge. And this is just to separate the different pages from each other, and I'll just be sure that it hits the bleed edge correctly and the margins correctly. So there we go. Of course, I have Smart Guide switched on, but it's always just a good idea to make sure that everything is located properly. Of course, this spine, I would have made this spine on the A master instead of me having to copy it twice. So I'm actually just gonna click cut and then place it on the A master, and I'll just use, I'll just paste it in place, and thus it's located correctly on both of my pages down here. And you can write some text here. If you want to write text on the spine, it's just a matter of, you know, typing something inside your box right here, and just making sure that when you place it along the spine that you just rotate it, right? So then it can be located along the spine. Of course, in the color, which makes, I don't know which buttons I'm hitting right now. It's but this way you would have the text located on the spine, and you could of course have a margin for the spine if you want, or you could just make sure that the text box right here, that you right click it, choose text frame options, and then choose the one called align to center, so it centers the text so it never hits the top of the spine. Notice though that it will center according to the X height of the text, so it's not precisely center. It will not look as if it's precisely center, but actually the X height of the text is precisely center. X height, that's the height of, you know, normal letters. So you see the center, exact center of this text box is the top of the O, the top of the S, the top of the G, and so on. That's what we call the X height. That will be exact center. But enough about that. That's just if you wanted to write text as well along the spine, then you know how to do so. If I'm supposed to export these 2 pages, I'll just actually write something right here. Back, I'll just call this back B, and let's call this one F, and we'll call this one inside we'll just call it I1 and I2. These are, the front page will have the I1 on the back of it, and the back page will have I2 on the back of it. If you flip the paper in real life, in real life. Okay, so now if I were to export this, I would just say file. Of course, I would save this. It's really important that you remember to save your files as well. I would save this as an InDesign file. When that's done, of course, I will print it. And in order to print this correctly, I'll just call this test. I'll save it to my desktop, click save, and then I'll tell it to print as spreads. Save as spreads. This is the most important thing to remember. Otherwise, they will just come out as 6 separate pages. One called B, the next being a spine that's very thin, then a page called F, and so on. So it's very important that you make sure that spreads is switched on, and then everything else should actually be fine. Of course, you will need to save in the standards that Regge normally tells you for print, which is, as I recall, PDX for 2010, as I recall. But you'll just have to check Regge's the compendium you have from Regge, where it tells you precisely which standard to save in. But I'll ignore that because now we're just focusing on saving as spreads. Let's export this. And now it should be located on my very messy desktop. And let's look how it appears. BF, see, that's how we saw it inside of InDesign, and the spine is located at the center, and I1 and I2. So it's located exactly like it's supposed to inside of InDesign. And that is how to build your cover inside of InDesign, and make sure that it's exported correctly afterwards for PDF. Yes, you're recording, and thus I'll share my screen and go to InDesign. Okay, so I'll just, of course, this was the previous thing we were doing. I'll, of course, remember to save it as an InDesign file, and I'll just call it cover pages, whatever, and close it. So for the inside pages, we'll create a new document. And of course, actually, whatever you used as the most recent item is what InDesign suggests in recent. So if I just choose this one called custom, and it's the first one of all of these, it will actually have the same settings as the one I just created a second ago, 30 minutes ago. So it will be facing pages, it will have the same margins, it will have the same bleed, and so on. So that way I don't have to do this again. I could actually save this as a preset. I could save this, call it my magazine settings, and simply just save it. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to click create. But for some people, it might be nice that they actually have in the saved area, they actually have their saved versions. And you can see I actually have some pre-saved standards called magazine cover and magazine. So it's a good idea if you're using a document type again and again and again with these dimensions and this setup, well, that you actually save it, and then you can just find it all the time inside of the saved area. But I'll just use the recent, and perhaps the margins is going to be different. For those people who already created a document, a magazine cover, which has a margin of 12.7 millimeters, they're going to regret that because it leaves almost no room for having a page header and having a page footer. So I would suggest that you have, most likely, unless your layout is better with a small page header and a small page footer, I would suggest that you have something, a higher value in the top and a higher value at the bottom. But it's really up to you. It depends on which layout you're using for your magazine. I'm just gonna go with 25, and perhaps you'll have a different inside and outside. Perhaps the outside will be a bit bigger. It's really up to your standards and preferences what these measurements and increments are. I'll click create, and just to get something done, and remember to have facing pages switched on. Okay, so I'll click create. Some of you will be annoyed that the first page is on the right. Well, that's because the first page you look at on something that you open will always be a right page. When you open something, while it's still closed, there will only be one page visible, and that will always, if you're European, be the right page, because we read from left to right. So magazines, books, and so on always has the cover or the book cover to be a right page. Then you open it up and you'll be able to see left and right page on the following pages. So, and I'm saying this because I noticed that a lot of students are doing whatever possible to get the first page to be a left page. Well, it is possible to have a left page as the first page simply by right-clicking, but you shouldn't do this in general. But if you want it, then I'll show you how. It's just a matter of right-clicking on your first page, then going to numbering and section options and calling this a page 2 instead. Okay, then it will be a left page instead. You only do this if you know that your document article is going to start on a left page. Otherwise, I would never do this. It's just because I know this article, this precise article, will start on a left page. Well, then I'll do this. Otherwise, I will always make sure that I keep it a right page. So I'm gonna just remove this, but I just showed you how to make the first page stand on your left. So I'll just make it a right page instead. And now we have our pages. Okay, so what happens sometimes if people create a new document and they don't make it facing pages, we'll just compare that and click create, is that you notice that you can always set it to become a facing pages document by going to File, Document Setup, and then choosing for it to become facing pages. And some students will think, well, okay, now we solved the problem because we just switched on facing pages. And yes, now it's a facing pages document, but look up here in masters. The masters are set to be single page layout, whereas if you set it up correctly from the start, the masters will be set up to be facing pages. You can always set your single page document to become a facing pages document by right-clicking and choosing master options for a master, then selecting number of pages too. But there will be some things that if you already created this document and it has several pages containing a lot of items on it, the master pages will suddenly not act as they're supposed to, because the one master page was supposed to work for both left and right pages before. Now suddenly it will only work for the right page objects because there will be another master page on the left. Okay, so if that sounded a bit complicated, just forget what I just said. I'm just saying it's best that you made it that you created facing pages when the document was born and not somewhere into the process. So like I was saying, when creating a new document, make sure from the start that it's facing pages. It's going to save you a lot of work if you just made sure that this was switched on, the one called facing pages. Okay, so, and I did that with this document right here. And since we're going to be working with creating a template right now, this is going to be a template for all the articles, all the content in my magazine. Since this is going to be the template for that, I'll be working mainly in the master pages area. So if I will be using the document pages inside of this document, it will be mainly to test if everything is working as it's supposed to on the master pages. So I might be testing that on the physical pages down here, the document pages down here. So that will be the only purpose of actually using these document pages down here, because this is supposed to be a template which will work for any article, anything that's going to be the content of my magazine. So I'll go up to my master page and we're going to go through 3 different topics now. We're going to go through grids, and there's a lot of items on the grids, and we're going to go through styles, mainly paragraph styles and character styles, and of course we'll also discuss a third topic, master pages in general, because we will not only be using a master, we'll actually be using other masters as well. But let's just construct our first master page. And let's say this is for a generic article. This is just, it might be, what you'll use as the template for most of your articles inside of your magazine. There are a lot of ways to make grids. I'm going to show you first one that you already saw when we had, I think it was visual identity, where I showed you how to use guideline grids, and I'm going to show you that again. So before I do that, I'm just actually going to construct, I'm going to make a layer with the different items and actually name them specific stuff. So I'm gonna name the bottom layer background. I'm gonna name the one up top of that. I'm gonna name that images. Actually, I'm gonna name that text, and then I'm gonna name this one images, and I'll name this one footer and header. And of course, the footer and header will always be the topmost layer, since you never want to hide accidentally the page numbering or whatever information is inside of the footer and the header. So these will always be on top of everything else. So these will normally be the layers that's located inside of my InDesign magazine document. I could also name this actually graphic instead, if that seems more logical. Then you know that it's both images and vector. You could also have two separate layers for vector and images. It's really up to you. Okay, so now I have the different layers. Most likely, while making the grids, I'll be located on the background layer, because then I can actually switch off the grid by just switching off the background. So when making this grid, then you can make it custom. You can actually drag guidelines from your rulers. You have rulers out here on the left and at the top. If you don't see those rulers, you can find them by going to View and Show Rulers. That's Command R. On a PC, that's Control R. So you can switch them on and off as you want, and just be sure that you can see them or not. These are not really relevant right now, these rulers out here, because I'm gonna automize my grid by simply going to Layout and choosing the one called Create Guides. And it's a good idea before creating these guides that I make sure that both pages are selected. And as I can see, both of them are. You see that both of them are highlighted. Otherwise, I'll construct the grid on only one of these pages, and that will mean that I'll have to do double work. So I'll make sure that both are selected over here, and then go to Layout, Create Guides, and I'll have Preview switched on, of course. And this, I'm not sure what you decided in your style guide, how if you're going to use a grid that consists of 6th, 8th, 12ths, and it really depends on you what you discover. But I'm just going to make a grid that consists of 12 and 12. This will not create, squares. This will create rectangles, because it's a format that is higher than it is wide. So of course, some of you might instead want for it to be a square grid, whereas you calculate, okay, if the width is 2/3 of the height, well, then it will only need 2/3 of the width, the amount of guidelines in the width. So that means that I'll perhaps switch the number to being 8, and this is not exactly 30 times 20, this layout. This is an A4, so it's 29.7 times 21. So it will not be exactly square, but it will be close to square, these things, this grid that you see in here. Some might want to work with a gutter, some might want not to. You decide yourself what fits your needs best. If you work with a high amount of grids, gutter may be less important. If you work with a low amount of grid lines, then gutter might be exactly what you need. But I think I'll just create a gutter, and this gutter I would normally coordinate so my gutter is the same width as a gutter inside of a text column. So if you have two text columns next to each other, the gutter width of those two text columns, if they're set to 7.5, it makes no sense that my gutter for my guidelines is set to 5 millimeters. Then of course I would set those to 7.5 millimeters instead, and 7.5 millimeters. So of course coordinate this with your document and the document standards. I think I'll set mine to, let's say, 6 and 6, because then everything goes up. You can divide everything with 2, and that just seems more logical to me. And also in general, I prefer a gutter in my text columns that is more than 5. So 6 seems like a good standard for me. I'm not saying you're not supposed to use these measurements. You're supposed to use the measurements which make sense to you. Okay, one thing that I will most likely switch on is relative to margins. Otherwise, I'll have my grid go outside the margins, and I don't need the grid outside the margins. Everything that's important will be going on inside of the margins. So otherwise, I'll just have a grid that doesn't match up with my margins, and that just makes it really annoying when using the smart guides to drag stuff around and make stuff bigger or smaller. So I think this is what I'm going with. This is a relatively, this might seem relatively chaotic, this grid right here, but when you're working with it, it's actually gonna seem like very balanced and easy to use, and you can always switch off the visibility. So I'll click OK to this, and if I suddenly decide to not see it, I can just switch off my background because I made it on the background. So this grid right here lives on the background layer. So it's like an object. It's like when you create an object, that object will live on whatever layer you created it on. Likewise, these grid lines will be located on the background layer, but you won't be able to see them. InDesign, the smart guys who made InDesign decided people will probably be annoyed that there's a million grid lines inside of this background layer. So those are not visible when you open up the layer and check what's inside. And that makes perfect sense to me, because this is just going to be so annoying if you have like a million objects down here indicating the grid lines. Okay, so you can do it like this, toggle off and on the visibility. One other thing you could do instead is actually to find the grid lines, grids and guides in view, the view menu, go to grids and guides, and simply just tell it not to show the guides. You can simply choose hide guides up here. I prefer having made them, but that requires for me to have made them on the same layer from the start. I prefer that I can simply just switch them off by toggling off and on visibility of this layer. Some might even think that it's more relevant to actually call this, have a layer called grids like this. So it's not anything that has to do with visible objects like background objects. And then I could actually just make a new layer called that background, background, and actually have this below perhaps grids. I don't know. It could also be above. But still, the grids will be located on this layer, which was before the background, but now called grids. This is where I prefer to build my grids on a layer that is either its own or on the layer which is the background. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is to see is to also see which other options there are for creating grids. And but one thing I'll show you first, and I've shown you this before when working with grids. If it's almost impossible for you to see the grid, you can simply just select the entire grid, and you can go to layout, ruler guides, and simply change the color. Right now it's set to cyan, and this is perhaps not that visible. What I often do is I actually set it to be grid orange or gold, and this makes it much more visible so you can easier see what's going on. I prefer this color also because no other grid uses orange, and it is very visible. It's almost it's impossible not to see. Okay, so that was one way of creating grids. I'll just hide this grid and I'll just call this grid number 1. I'll just show you 2 other ways of creating a grid. Let's call this grid number 2. Because Rege probably showed you another way of doing it. And you can always, and so I'm going to call this one custom grid. If I were to create an object like this, I could just make sure that it fits the dimension, some proportionality of whatever's inside of this margin. It could also be the whole page instead. But if I wanted this object right here to be, let's say, divided in 8ths, and I want my inside margin to be in 8th wide and in 8th height, well, then I could just make sure that my reference point up here on the left is set to be the topmost left, because then when I make it smaller in a second, it will grow smaller, or it will become smaller. It will shrink. That's what I was trying to say. It will shrink smaller towards the top left corner. So I'm going to try that. I'll make sure that the proportions are set to both change at once. So I'll just click this proportions on, proportionality. And then I'll simply divide by 8. I'll write, this is you write /8. This means divide by 8. And I'll simply click enter. And this divides it both in the width and the height because I switched on the proportionality. If you want this to be a grid that is divided in 8ths in the width and 12 in the height, then of course you would switch this proportionality off and simply write divided by 8 in width and divided by 12 in height. And then it would seem more like a square than a rectangle. Okay, so having done this, I could actually change my fill to become stroke and go into stroke and make sure that the stroke is on the inside, the align stroke to inside, right? And that's just to make sure that there's nothing going out over the border of the object. Instead it's going inside. Okay. So the next thing I'll do is make sure to duplicate this object 8 times in width, actually 7 times because it's already there as 1. So I'll duplicate it 7 more times in width and 7 more times in height. And how do I do that? I simply go to edit. I have it selected first of all. I have it selected, and then I'll go to edit and I'll choose the one called step and repeat. And it's very, very important that I have the object selected because I need to be able to see the measurements, the width and the height. I'll switch on create as grid. And I know that I'm going to need 7 rows and I'm going to need 7 columns. And right now I can't click more columns. That's because my number down here is too high. So I'll just change that. And then I should be able to write 7 and 7. Okay, so what it's going to do now if I click preview, it's going to show nothing because I'm making 7 copies on top of the object. So instead what I'm going to write in the vertical is the height. So that's 30.875. Okay, so actually it needed to be 8. And in horizontal, it's gonna be 21.875. And now you see you actually build a grid using boxes. I'll click OK. And this might be one way instead that you create your own grid. When using this grid, perhaps you'll want the swatch to be, the black that's being used inside of the stroke to be less visible. So perhaps switch it to 20. So this way you won't be seeing the grid as clearly. One thing that's going to be annoying is if you forget to switch this grid off, then when you send it to print, it will have the grid on the print. So just to make sure that it will never print in any way, this grid right here, you'll just simply right click. You don't need to right click, but you could right click and choose layer options, but you could also just double click. And then one thing you need to be sure is that print layer is switched off. That way you will never print this. This will never be exported, so it can never be printed. So that's just, then it will work like it's a normal guideline grid, ensuring that it will not come on print and not come in the export. Okay, so even though you see it here, when you export it, it will be gone. Like when you saw the grids, you've noticed that grids will never print. Likewise, this grid you just created here will never print because you set the layer, even though it's actually objects you created, you set that layer to not be able to print it. That actually means not be able to export these. And that makes sure that you don't have a grid on top of your images accidentally. Okay, so that was 2 different grids. The third grid I won't actually need a layer for because that's normally integrated as part of InDesign. And you can find that up here inside of View, Grids and Guides. There's something called Show Document Grid. This lives in InDesign. This is inherent to InDesign. It's always there. You can't see it, but I can click it visible, and then you'll notice that there's some grid there. And if you decide on using this grid, I actually made videos about how to fine adjust your document grid, but I'm not going to go into details with how to mathematically make a document grid which fits your document, but I'm going to show you that you can actually decide how big these grid lines are. I don't know if you can see it, but you'll notice that it's divided into sections. Some sections have, a line cutting through them that is a bit thicker than the rest of the lines, and that's called a section. We can change how this looks by going into InDesign Preferences on a PC. That's Edit Preferences, and in here you can go to the section called Grids. So down here in the area called Document Grid, you can actually adjust these grid lines, and for me it would be logical to say the grid line is every, perhaps 15 millimeters or so, but since I made my top 25 millimeters, as I recall, and my bottom 25 and my inside 15 and my outside 20, it's not really going to match with the measurement of 15. It will match the measurement 5, but that's probably going to look bad in my document, but it will be able to be divided by 5. Then I'll need less subdivision. So perhaps I'll need, I don't know, perhaps 2 subdivisions. I'll click OK. And this just makes a hell of a fuss on the document. And of course, at the bottom margin, it doesn't seem right because the height is 29.7. So there will actually be an incoherency of 0.3 millimeters for this grid at the bottom. But otherwise, here at the top, it will look perfect. You'll notice that the grid matches exactly the margin, both on the left, but also on the right. But down here, if I can just scroll all the way down, you'll notice that it doesn't match entirely. And that's simply because the document height is not 30 millimeters, but it's 29.7 millimeters. But this is a way that you could quickly just make a grid. And of course, I would not make a grid that has this many grid lines. It's simply confusing to look at. There are several videos on the internet on the topic how to use the document grid inside of InDesign, and I also made some videos. Most of them are in Danish though, but you can go out and research that. In general, I'll just hide the document grid. In general, I would recommend that you use either this version number 1, the first one I showed, or version number 2, the second one I showed. It's really up to you which one you use, or if you decide on using something entirely different than what I showed. I know that a lot of the students on marketing, they're actually using boxes in general just to measure stuff, and they have the boxes located outside of the design. That's not a way to do it in general for an entire magazine, because it's very hard for one person to communicate to a second person how to use these boxes. So it's much better in general that they are preset, that they are already defined, and they're located on the page, so you know how to use them. Yeah, I think that's enough about grids. That was 2 ways of doing it. 3 ways of doing it. I think I'll stick with using this one. Notice also, when using the guideline grid, it's possible for you to change some of the lines to being a different color. For example, if I want this at the top margin, both left and top, so both of these two, if I want these to be a different color, and I'll just have shift selected, and these to be a different color, and these to be a different color. And actually I can see that there's one I need to select again, and also the ones down here and here, and yeah, I think that's all. Then I could simply just go to layout while those are selected and click ruler guides and choose for them to become, let's say, brick red. And that way we have some of the guidelines a different color than the others. You might also want the midsection to be like that. So I'll just find my midsection over here. Is this the midsection? Yes. And I'll simply choose those two to have a different color as well. Brick red. So that way we have some kind of, easier way to see where the center of our document is. Yeah, and perhaps it makes a better system for you that you have different color for the guidelines. Okay, that was creating the grid. These grids are located on your master, and thus they will always be shown on the document pages which uses that master. So that means if I created several pages here inside of my magazine, they all contain this grid, and they can always have that grid switched off by simply toggling off the visibility. Okay, so when I'm supposed to create images on these pages and so on, I can actually use the grid which has been created already, and I'll just try putting in an image here, and then you can see how that works. And after we've done that, I think we'll take a short break, and then everyone can just try figuring out how their own grid is going to look. And then after that, we'll set up the rules for our paragraph styles and for our images that's going to be located on the different pages. But let's just see, what can a grid do? What is the potential of a grid? So I'll just create an image box, an image rectangle, and I'll use the smart guides to make sure that I drag it correctly according to these guides. And of course, I will be sure also that I locate these objects in the right layer. So I could actually also lock my grid layer so I never accidentally, put stuff in that layer. This is going to be graphic, and I'll just lock my grids number 1 and 2. I think my graphics layer is a color which I can barely see, so I'll just choose it to be, yeah, black. Okay, so I'm gonna locate my graphic on the black layer. And I'm just gonna place a random picture right here. Of course, yours will not be random. Your pictures will be according to whatever magazine concept you're dealing with. So I put something on the desktop. I think I named it, let's see, I called it videos. Yes, here. And this is some photos I shot of my girlfriend where she's dressed as some kind of Viking-y thing. So I'll just find a landscape format picture here. I'm not done editing them yet, so I know that some of them are quite dark. So let's say this one, I'll put that in here. And you notice that actually the image is going outside the box. And we'll also look at that topic after we've had a small break where you can try this out yourself, because that's also something you actually want your InDesign document to do, to resize the images for you so you don't have as much work to do on the images. In this case, I'll just resize it either manually or actually by using perhaps these different options up here, which is fit content to frame, like that, or fit frame to content. That makes, that's often a bad idea, because then you're not using your template at all. And there's different things you can do here. Just know that it's very important that you don't accidentally constrain your proportions, and that's what happened when I, just constrain. I just told it to fit inside the box. So that actually made the image. You can't really see it on the picture, but you did this without constraining the proportions. So this is non-proportionally. So actually, the person gets either smashed. Gets flattened, or the person gets squeezed together. So I'll just make sure that these proportions are right, so I can actually always change them up here to be 8 and 8 or 9 and 9, so on, because I set it to constrained proportions for scaling. So that means that now I'm sure that it's not been unproportionally scaled, and I can just move the picture around as I see it fit. And see, the great part about this also, if actually I was using the picture, let's just yeah, of course now I made it smaller so I can't find the bars that I'm supposed to use. 1 second. We'll just set it to, let's say, 12%, like that. And also because I'm using black, the image is white. But see, okay, so how could I use this grid? Now I made it bigger. I made the picture bigger so I can show you how the grid can actually be used. So you actually choose to use this grid to resize objects and to place text. So this is a very simple way of making sure that the grid is being used in how it's supposed to be used. So this will make even more sense if I have several pictures. So I'm just gonna create some more pictures, and actually instead of making a image rectangle now, I'm just gonna choose a random picture right here, and instead of having a pre-made box, I'll simply just click and drag it. So I'll choose to click and drag it from, this is where the page starts, so I'll click and drag it from, let's say, here. So it goes to around here. And that way I have the grid, so I can always resize the picture so it fits these, this grid that I already created. And then when I put in text, let's say I'm going to put in some text here. I'm working on the right side right now. When I put in text, and of course this text will be located on a different layer, So I'm just going to move that down to the text layer. When I fill in text now, you'll notice that the text goes behind the pictures. That's because the pictures will need a text wrap. So I'm just going to select both my pictures and I'll choose for them to have, and it's very important that the pictures are above the text layer, because that way I can easily select the pictures even though I'm inside of the text box, because the pictures are on top of the text. But I'll then choose for it to use text wrap, these pictures to use text wrap, and it will be a text wrap of, let's say, 5 millimeters. And thus it pushes the text away and makes sure that that no text is behind the pictures. And this actually prevents some text from going the right place, which is a bit annoying. So I might be changing the baseline grid settings for my text so that the text will also flow right here. Right now, I'm just going to do a quick change. I'm just going to change it to become, oh, it's actually because there was a new paragraph, I see. So let's just see what happens if I do like that, and then change it to 15. Yeah, so perhaps I would want to change either the text wrap or my baseline grid, because you see it's just preventing the text right down here to get up here. So I could, okay, so now I'm going to do it manually, but of course it would be nice if you have these settings prefixed so you don't have to change this manually. But I'm just going to change manually it to be, instead of being 5, I switched off this change so it doesn't change all the values. I'm going to change that to be instead 2, and that way there's room enough for the text to flow beneath the picture. And I'm going to do the same down here. Perhaps this is a general problem when using this grid, that I'll need to have the bottom to be 2 instead. But that's a way of using the grid. And you know, when we also have our paragraph styles ready, we'll have something to work with, not just the pictures, but also the text, how we can get that to look nice side by side with the pictures. But that's just a small introduction to how to use the grid. This will in the end be deleted. This is gonna be saved as a template, this file. So I will in the end delete these pages down, the document pages. So temporarily, let's just move this up into my master page. So I'm just gonna paste that inside of here. I'm using the one called paste in place to place it correctly, exactly where it was located before. And now it's located on the master page, so that means I can actually just go in and delete my physical pages, my document pages, and now this is a master page item located right here. I think the last thing I'll do before I stop recording is just make sure that there's no text flowing outside the text box. So I'll do that by going into my edit in Story Editor, and then I can just see everything that's going outside the text box, and I'll just delete that. Boom. And close this up, and now we have no text going outside the text box. I think that's enough for now, so you don't fall asleep. I'll just stop this video session now, and then after having a break, we'll go on with paragraph styles and also how to work with character styles and how, in general, just to work in InDesign content pages. And yes, it states that it's recording now, so I'll share my screen. And let's just get on with it. Okay, so we're going to use more than one master page in our document, but we'll also use some standards for the text as to the baseline grid it's using. and we'll make some paragraph styles according to if it's headers, subheaders, body text, and so on. So I think the logical step to take now, you can do it. It doesn't matter which procedure you take it in, as long as you do these different things. I think I'll start out making the paragraph style. So I'll just be sure to have my. I'll just move some of the pictures so it doesn't interrupt with my text, and I'll start focusing on how headers should look and how subheaders should look and so on. And you probably already recorded this in your style guide. So in general, I would almost never use Minion Pro as my standard font unless I'm working for Adobe. But so I'll probably have some generic body text, which is I'll choose a generic body text. Of course, you would not use some generic type. Optima is one of my personal preferences, so I'll choose that one for body text, and I'll probably choose it to be lower than 12 points. So I'll set it to 11 point, just so it's not too big when you're reading it. Perhaps I will even set it to 10 points, but right now I'm just focusing on some generic setup. Okay, since this is most likely going to be English text, unless some of the Danish students choose to write it in Danish, I'll be sure to set it to whichever language I'm writing it in. Remember, in the course assignment, you're supposed to either find articles that are written in Danish or English, or write the articles yourself in either Danish or English. You're not allowed to write them in any other language than that, and you're not allowed to use ipsum lorem text. So what I'm using right now of text is just to show you how to do these things, but you're not allowed to, in whatever you hand in the end, to use ipsum lorem text. So don't use placeholder text when making the finished articles. But be sure to also set it to the language that you're using. Otherwise, hyphenations, orddeling in Danish, will be wrong. The hyphenations will be wrong if you set it to Danish, but the text is English. So be sure to that it's set to the correct language. If you're using also, if you're checking if your spelling it is correct, it will do it according to whichever language it's set to. So right now, if it's set to English UK, then it will check the spelling according to English UK. Of course, I recommend, if you're actually checking the grammar, checking the spelling and so on, that you actually do it inside of Word, because Word features a much better spelling and grammar feature than InDesign does. But you might, have changed a few things and you're not willing to go back to Word. Well, then you can overall check the spelling and just make sure that everything seems like it's spelled correctly. But like I said, Word is a better program for that. Okay, so the language needs to be set correct. I'm assuming that I'm writing in English, so I'll set it to English. And perhaps I'm using optical tracking instead of metrical. And, just making sure that whatever, that the settings are correct for my body text. Okay, so let's say this is the setting for my body text. Then I'll simply go to my paragraph styles panel down here, and I'll simply go into new paragraph style. And I'll also be sure to apply this 11 point, 15 point, optical, and so on, using English dictionary. I'll be sure to apply that to the selection. I know that these settings were already part of the selection, but that doesn't mean that it will remember that this selected text actually uses the same paragraph style that I'm making right now. So to be sure that the text also know that this paragraph style that I'm creating right now should be applied to this text, so it remembers this is a paragraph style, this is not just text, this is actually a text using a paragraph style, then I should be sure to include the apply style to selection. So this is important to remember. Otherwise, it will just say afterwards that it's a basic paragraph, even though it's not a basic paragraph. It's a paragraph using Optima. Okay, so, and I'll name this body text. This makes sense to name it body text because this is my general body text. And if you're making a Danish document, this would be named brødtekst. Okay, so I'll also make some generics for the header and the subheader. It's like I said, it's just random what I choose. It's just something generic, but you probably already wrote this inside of your style guide. So I'll change this to not be an Optima. Let's say this is Futura, if I can spell it right. And of course, not a Futura condensed, like some of you sometimes use. And I don't know, perhaps just medium. Since it's a header, I'll go with bold. And perhaps since my body text was 11 point, perhaps I'll use 22, or perhaps I'll even use 33, like that, making it 3 times as big as the body text. Okay, so and of course the header, the leading should be according to the text size. So I'm going to change this to auto, or I'm going to change it to 45 since the other was 15, and just make sure that this is the settings for my header. So 33, 45, and that means if I ever write one more line of that, there will be a proportional distance between the two lines of text, proportional to the size of the text. Okay, I'm gonna make this a new paragraph style, and it doesn't matter that I don't select the entire text, because a paragraph automatically selects an entire paragraph. So I'll just show you how that works. I'll call this header. I'll be sure that it applies the style to selection, and I think that's fine. Okay, so what I was saying is that a paragraph style is always applied to an entire paragraph. You can see if I click header now, it will apply it to that entire paragraph. It doesn't just apply it to the word I'm in. A paragraph style is always applied to an entire paragraph. That's the difference between character styles and paragraph styles. Paragraph styles are always applied to the entire paragraph. And a paragraph is easy to define what a paragraph is. A paragraph is actually just when you're inside a text and you suddenly click enter. By clicking enter, you make that text into a paragraph. So a paragraph is a line of text until you click enter, right? So you might have 10 lines of text and then you click enter. Well, those entire 10 lines of text are a paragraph. Okay, so that's just, so a paragraph style will change everything inside those 10 lines of text if they were one paragraph. Okay, so, and I'll make a subheader as well. Perhaps this should be, let's say this is gonna be, I don't know, Century Gothic. And I'll set it to 22 and with a leading of 30, like that. It's also optical and it's also English, and I'll just make a paragraph style for that, and we'll just make sure that it's set to its name subheader and it's applied to the selection. Okay. So with those things set, I now have some text that some formatting that I'm happy to be using later on, and I can actually just test my text on the page next to this. So I'll just take a copy of my text and put it over here on the page next to this. And let's say I want there to be a header right here. So I'll just indicate that this needs to be a header. And we'll actually see that what happens now if I make this a header. I'll just select, I'll just make a box down here and see if my text is floating correctly. I'll just actually make one more line of text here. And of course, because I made all the lettings correct according to each other, it's going to be a hard time for me to make them not follow each other, be aligned like this. But let's just say I'm gonna mess something up. I'm just gonna change this to be different. Okay, now you'll notice that suddenly my text is not aligned on the left side of the paper compared to on the right side of the paper. And this will happen pretty often, especially if you're not using the same leading proportionally, you know, because I was using a leading which is 45, 30, and 15. Actually, it will if it matches the leading values on left and right side of the paper, they will always align to each other. But in this case, I made a difference in the leading value down here, which means that the body text over on the right side will actually not be aligned to the text on the left side of the paper. And this will, when looking at the pages, especially if it's in this area, if the text is next to each other, right next to each other, it will make a zigzaggy appearance. I'll just show you that. I'll just try changing this. Then if I go into preview mode, you notice that it seems a bit zigzaggy. This is even easier to see if I actually zoom in a bit. You'll notice that it doesn't seem aligned, that the text on left side of the paper doesn't seem aligned to the text on the right side of the paper. And this is very, for a graphic designer, this is something that's really ugly to look at. So we need to be sure to fix that. And that's where baseline grid comes in. So I'll just set my text, I'll set my body text to use the baseline grid. So I'll go into edit body text. That's simply by right clicking body text. Don't double click it, because then if you're located in a text box, let's say you're in the header and you just double click body text, then accidentally you will change the header to become the body text. So always when changing paragraph styles, right click to choose edit, so you don't accidentally apply that style to wherever you're located inside the text box. Okay, I'll edit the body text, and I'll actually set it to use baseline grid. And that's down here in indent and spacing. You can choose this one called align to grid, and you'll simply choose all lines to be aligned to grid. And this will at first look horrible. This will look very horrible, because all the lines will have a double leading value. So this is not looking proper, but it is set up correctly though. So what I need to change next is actually how InDesign interprets my baseline grid and the increments in that baseline grid. So how do I set up my baseline grid to be correct? Because now you'll notice that the text from the left to the right is always aligned. See, it's always aligned no matter where it's located. So the text will always be aligned no matter where it's located. But I need to not have this the leading between the text to be double. So the way I'm going to change that is to go into InDesign preferences and the one called grids. On a PC, this is located in edit preferences grids. And in here, I have the area called baseline grid, and this is where I choose for my baseline grid settings to be. And you notice this one called increment area. This increment area is supposed to be the same value as your leading value or higher if you put it to be lower than the leading value, you will always get double spacing, double leading between each line. So this is very important that the leading is at least the same value as the increment area is at least the same value as the leading. And you know that I set my leading to be 15. Perhaps yours is set to be auto. Well, if yours is set to be auto, then figure out what the auto is. It will say next to auto parenthesis, and then if it's a text size 12, it will say parenthesis 14.4 in leading, because the leading value auto is 120% of the text size. So that means if you're using a font which is size 10, then 120% of that is 12, meaning for a text size 10, the leading is 12. But you just need to be sure that the leading value of the font is the same, at least inside of the baseline settings. So increment area, in my case, I set the leading to be 15 instead of using auto. Well, then I'll be sure that the increment area is also set to 15 or more. You can always go higher, but it doesn't make sense if you set the leading to be 15, because if you set this increment to be higher than 15, then you're actually changing the distance of leading, the distance between each line. So why even set it to 15 in the start if you're gonna put it to 18 in here? So in general, just set it to be the same increment area as you have inside of as the leading value of the font. Often some fonts will not look good using the auto leading value. So I recommend that if you're using the auto leading value, that you change instead the increment area to be a bit higher than the auto leading. Okay, so for those people who don't understand what I'm talking about, this is what we're talking about. When inside some text, this is the leading value, the leading. And it's not leading, it's lead, it's like lead, it's metal. It's because in old days they put lead in between lines of text when they were printing it. So that's why it's called leading. So the lead value, whatever it says here, is what you're supposed to, at a minimum, put inside of the increment area value of your baseline grid. So I'll set this to 15. Like I was saying, if you're using an auto value, it's okay to put the increment area a bit higher, because the auto value for some fonts looks better if you put it higher than the auto decided leading. Okay, so baseline grid. It shouldn't start at 12.7. because I changed my margin to not be 12.7. I changed my margin to my top of the page to be 25, as I recall. So if it's 25, then of course I'll set it to be 25 millimeters. So there's no point of me using baseline grid before the margin starts, because there will first be text inside of the margin, and the text that's outside of the margin is only header and footer text for the page header and the page footer. So I don't need a baseline grid in those areas. If you're ever wondering what view threshold is, it just means how far do I have to zoom in or out in order to be able to see the grid. So if you're zoomed too far out and you can't see the grid, it's because you need to zoom more in. So the grid disappears depending on how far you're zoomed in. In this case, you need to be zoomed into 75% of the document in order to be able to see this grid. And right now you can see down here at the bottom that I'm zoomed into 55.81%. So I would be able to see this grid if it was switched on, because I'm zoomed in even closer. So if I'm zoomed out further than 75%, I will not be able to see the grid. It simply disappears, but it's still there. It's just only visible if you zoom in this far. This is, yes, so you could also instead just say relative to top of margin, and then you don't have to write start. Then you don't have to remember what did I actually write in my margins. So I could just say relative to top of margin, and that seems more convenient for me. So I'll just click OK to this. Notice that it's set to be a blue color, and that's what we typically have as a baseline grid, a blue colored baseline grid. I'll click OK, and you'll notice now that suddenly my text rearranged itself, so it's no longer double leading value. And just I'll switch off my I'll go outside of preview, and actually it doesn't seem like I'm able to see this. So even though I set my threshold to 75, I probably need to zoom in even further, unless it's because the baseline grid is actually hidden. And in order to get to find out, I'll just go to View, Grids and Guides, and I'll simply see if it's hidden, and it is. So I'll click to Show Baseline Grid, and it's still hidden. So I'll just zoom in a bit more, and then we'll see that it's okay. So actually, it was because I needed to go in closer. Yeah, I was zoomed out too far. And here we'll see the baseline grid. This is actually what the text is aligned to. And notice that only my body text is aligned to it. And that's because only the body text, it was the body text which I went in to edit the body text settings, and I changed the indent and spacing to all lines. So that means it suddenly uses baseline grid. Whereas if I went to check my subheader and right-click to edit subheader, you'll notice that it's not set to, actually it is because it was based on my body text, yeah. So I'll just choose that to not be arranged according to that. And that's also something you need to be aware of if you were making your subheader and header on top of your body text. I created my body text first, then I was located on top of my body text paragraph style. And that means actually if I don't change it, it will say that it's based on body text. So that I'll just change that immediately, so my subheader doesn't change anything if I change my body text. So that was me making a huge mistake, which I luckily can change. So I'll of course say that this should be based on no paragraph style. So it's not changing itself if I change the body text. I'll just click OK to this and make sure that the header has changed in the same manner. So this should of course not be based on my body text as well. So now it's based on no paragraph style, and of course I will have to change this into being none. So this way you can see now my header and my subheader is not following the baseline grid, though I would like actually my subheader to be following the baseline grid on one line of text. So I'll change my subheader, edit subheader, to use the baseline grid on first line only. This means that if I were to write several lines of text, you'll notice that of course it will show because I'm using 30 here. Okay, I'll just change this value. You'll notice then that this second line of text is not following the baseline. See, because I said I choose for it to use inside of the indent and spacing first line only. Okay, I'll just delete all of that. And of course, I'll just set it to 30. And this will mean that it will look like it's still following the baseline grid because my leading matches my increment. My increment was set to 15 and my leading is set to 30. So they will still almost always seem as if they are located at the right place inside of your document, even though they're not following your baseline grid. Okay, so that's how to set up your baseline grid. It will always not seem as if it's following your baseline grid if you had set it to auto and then change the increment to be something else than the auto. So this was just a bit about how you make your paragraph styles and how you make them seem. I don't know if you see it, but the text seems much more aligned and much more balanced right now in this document already, just by having made sure that the paragraph styles are using a baseline grid. So that was a bit about making paragraph styles and also how to set your text to follow the baseline grid. Okay, so if I were supposed to make also a page header and a page footer on my master page, well, I would start making more paragraph styles. So in order to do this, actually, whoops, I'll just go outside my text box and I'll actually select this text right here and I'll put it in a style group. So I'll just make a new folder. You can make new folders down here, and then I'll just call this article text or something like that, or in general magazine typography or something like that. And I'll also make a folder called, and I'll just make sure that it's located outside here. I'll make a new folder called that header. Well, actually call it page header and footer, because just so you don't mix header, the font, header font with the page header font. So I'm going to call this page header footer. And then you have you make a system for your different paragraph styles. So if I were supposed to have some text written up here with, let's say it's up here, it's gonna say I'm gonna make it use basic paragraph, because right now it was set to align to the baseline grid because it was using body text, meaning that I couldn't even write anything because there is no baseline grid up here. So I'll just write this is a footer, or I could write whatever the name of this magazine is, Viking Girl Magazine. And I would like this to be located on the left. I would like it to be in, I don't know if it's supposed to be Century Gothic or Futura like the header. So I'm just going to choose something and perhaps set it to bold, because I'm going to put it on a different colored background. This is going to, of course, be located in the footer and header layer, and it's probably going to be somewhat bigger. I'll probably make it proportional with the other items. Perhaps I was using 11 and 15, so this is going to be 22. And actually the lettering won't matter here because there's not going to be 2 lines of text. But in case I was going to use it, I'll just write it. Okay, so the text will be white like this, so we won't be able to see it. And then I'm going to put it against some colored swatch. So let's say this is going to be this color. I'm going to arrange it, send to back, and then we have our page header. And I don't know if this is how your page header is going to look in your magazine, but this is at least one way of creating a quick header for your magazine page header. But of course, I'll be using this again and again and again, this formatting, text formatting. So I'll just go to my paragraph style inside of the page header footer, and I'll just be sure to create a new paragraph style, and I'll call this page header text. Page header is fine. And it's based on nothing, and I'll click OK. And thus we're now starting to have a system. Likewise, I might be wanting there to be automatic page numbering. You know, instead of me having to make something and use a lot of time making it, I'll just paste this and use it down here. And of course, be sure to use your bleed edges. I see again and again that people forget to use the bleed edge. Use it. Why else make it? So it's a good idea to switch on and off preview at all times. Not all times, but But just remember to see if you put all the things all the way to the bleed edge. So down here, I would like there to be page numbering. I'll just call this ABC. I always make sure that there's at least room for 3 numbers, because often magazines will go all the way up to 150 pages per. So make sure that there's room in the text box for at least 3 different letters. And perhaps this is going to be different than the text up here. Perhaps this is going to be smaller. Perhaps this is actually only going to be 11 point and 15 in leading, and I'll just make a new paragraph style out of this. This is going to be the same font, but just smaller, and I'm going to call this page footer, page numbering, and just make sure that it's not based on the page header. So when if I make changes to the page header style, it won't affect the page footer. And I'll click OK to this. I don't want it to follow any grid, because if I set it to follow grid while it's located outside the margin, the text will simply disappear, because I put my baseline grid to only be within the margins when I was setting up my baseline grid inside of InDesign preferences grids. I'll click OK, and now we have both formatting for the page header and the page footer with page numbering. And of course, it's a good idea also to actually make it page numbering. So I'll just go into type, choose insert special character and markers, and then current page number, and it will write A. And that's actually just because this is an A master. This is your A master, so it will write whatever your master is named, and this is named A. But let's just check on the physical pages. If you check the physical pages, you'll notice that it will write 1, 2, 3, sorry, because this is the right page. testing. And of course, it will be logical that I have page numbering on the right side as well. So I'll just make sure to put it over there. And this actually looks horrible. I'll just perhaps make it look more like this. And perhaps I don't even need this box. I don't know. Perhaps I'll make it smaller. Perhaps I'll actually use the grids that I created. You know, there are a lot of questions I could ask myself. And perhaps I could even censor this text. So right-click text frame options and censor it like that. And okay, so I'll make a copy of this. Copy and just, you know, place it over here. And this text box, of course, I'll just move this. And I'll set this text to be located on the left. And of course, this makes the paragraph style complain, because now I changed it to be on the left instead of the right. So I could make another style called page numbering left, page numbering right. But I could also just, you know, be okay with the fact that the style is actually saying that there's an override right here. That plus next to the style means that there's something different in here. It's not totally like it's supposed to be. And the reason why it's saying that here is an override is actually because I set it to be left aligned instead of right aligned. If I updated that, I could always update this by right-clicking and choose redefine style, and that means update. It will actually change everywhere in your document to suddenly be left aligned. So watch out with redefining your style, but also know that redefining your style is a bonus thing. That makes stuff easier. For example, if I were to change the font I'm using inside of my body text, edit body text, if I find out up here that I actually need to change this to be, I don't know, let's say Helvetica, light, and this is, I want this to affect the rest of my document. Well, then you can just right-click your body text and choose redefine style boom, and then everything becomes Helvetica, which was Optima before. So this is also a great way to update your document. It will affect if you've written 40 pages of articles. All of those 40 pages of articles will be affected at once when you change your paragraph style. So this is a quick way of making sure that your entire document can quickly be edited by simply just making one change. I'm just gonna change this back because I actually prefer using my Optima. Okay, so that was something about having a system in here. Of course, you will have more things in here. You will also have, you know, caption text, bylines. You will have perhaps also for your cover, you would have date lines and cover lines and so on. So there's, of course, more things that you could make paragraph styles for. This is just an example of what you could make paragraph styles for. One thing I will say before we take a small break, because it seems like it's impossible for me to do, or perhaps we should just eat a small part of the break. Perhaps that's easier. Okay, I think we can actually do this in the time that we have. Okay, so one last thing I would like to tell you is that if you want there to be text on top of the picture, if you want there to be a caption text on top of the picture, you might think that there's a problem because we use text wrap on the picture. Thus, any text which comes close to the picture will be thrown away. So I'll just make a text box right now. I'm just gonna make it right here, and then I'll just move it over here on top of the picture. And yeah, I could make a paragraph style for this. I will in a short second. But one thing I will be sure to do, because note if I write in here, and of course I should write on the right layer. So I'll just move it to the right layer and whoop, like that. Notice that if I start writing in this layer, I write, nothing happens. And that's actually because anything I write will be thrown away from the picture because the picture is using text wrap. So in order to guarantee that I'm able to write text on top of the picture, I actually need to get a hold of this this text box down here. And the only way to do that, because the image is located on top of the text, is actually to go inside of the text layer and fetch it here, or move the text layer on top of the picture layer, or, you know, do it somewhere. Yeah, there's other ways to do it, but you could also actually have an extra layer called captions. Then, you know, captions text is text that's located on top of the picture. So those are always above graphic. So I could actually have located my text there. And I see that my text box is actually located in the wrong layer. I'll just move that down. Okay, so now I can always get a hold of the text box no matter what, because it's no longer beneath the image. Okay, so in order to be able to write in this text box, so it doesn't just throw away the text, I need to right-click my text box and choose the one called Text Frame Options. And in here, I will choose the one called Ignore Text Wrap, and then click OK. So this way, the text is allowed now to be written on top of the picture. And perhaps I'll set this to be using. I'll set mine to use body text. So that's fine. And let's just call this caption text. And you know, sometimes your image will be bright, or your image will be dark, and it will be hard to read what's actually written here. So perhaps you want this text to be white in this on top of this picture, but normally you would want it to be black. So I'm just going to make first of all, I would make a new group where I call this I would call this I don't know, text on top, or whatever. It could be caption text, you know. Perhaps I didn't need to make a style group for this, but I'm just gonna make one in this case, and I'll just create a new paragraph style because this is specifically something, this is caption text right here. So this is not just the general text for your articles. And I'll make sure that this caption text has, I don't know, something different. Often your caption text will be smaller, for example, smaller than your regular text. Perhaps it will even be a different font, but I just changed it a bit just so it makes sense that it's actually as, whoops, I was changing the wrong area. Yes. Okay. So I'm just going to redefine the style because I changed the size of it, and that way it updates the paragraph style. Okay. So in this case, I want the text to be white. So for this to be white, I don't want to change the style because sometimes I need it to be black, other times I need it to be white. So if that is the case, then I'll instead make a character style which is white. So I'll go to my character style, and I could actually turn it white right away, like that, white, and then I'll just make a character style which is white by saying new character style, and then it will remember that the change is that it's supposed to be white because it remembers all the other characteristics from the paragraph style, and the only change in my character style is that I changed it to be white. Everything else is as it's supposed to in the paragraph style. So I'll call this white, or I call it paper color. Okay. That means that, and I forgot to, one thing I did forget was when making it, I forgot this one called apply style to selection. So I had to click it again. Okay, so this means that if suddenly I need some text to be white at any point, I can actually always use this character style. And the same goes for if I want this text right here to be bold, I could just say new character style, and I could actually make it in bold inside of here. I could simply just say that it's supposed to be bold, like that, and call this bold, and click OK. So that way, if I click this now, it will make text anywhere bold if that font family supports bold. Likewise, if I want something to be italic, I could simply just make a character style. I could either make a new character style and then find italic in here, right? Or I could instead just make it italic here and then make a new character style. Then it remembers that the change is italic, and I'll just name this italic. And that way you have your character styles where you can select items and choose for them to become italic, bold, or white, or red, whatever. And you have your paragraph styles, which has the general formatting for entire paragraphs. And that's how to use paragraph styles and character styles inside of InDesign. Okay, so I think there was one more thing that I needed to say. Oh yeah. I think actually we'll take that after the break. So because that perhaps it will take like 10 to 15 minutes. So let's take creating several master pages and creating your digital flat plan after we've had half an hour, sorry, not half an hour, 45 minutes break. So that means we'll reconvene at 12:30 and take the last parts that I didn't get to. Back inside of InDesign. Okay, so the next thing we'll do on a master page is actually one thing I would like to do before actually making more master pages is actually empty these image boxes. So I'll make some specific rules for these image boxes. So I'll actually, because perhaps my generic layout has 2 pictures or 3 pictures on one page, this would be my generic layout for a general article. And I would like these boxes just to be perhaps gray, so we can see that it's supposed to be something inside of it. But just by giving it a color, we'll know that something is supposed to be put in there. So on my master page layout, I would like it just to be a box with color in it. But of course, when using these image boxes on the regular document pages, I would like, when putting pictures into them, that the pictures have some kind of formatting. And to make sure that they have that, I'll just right-click my image box after having removed the image. By the way, to remove an image from a box, you simply click once on that image with the white arrow, and you then click delete. If you click it with the black arrow, it will delete the entire image frame as well. So that's why I use the white arrow to just click it and then click delete once, and it will delete the content of the box, but not the box itself. Okay, so I'll right click and I'll choose the area called fitting. And because I already had an image inside of this box, it had some specific settings. You know, I moved the image around and so on, and it will actually remember these settings. So I'll need to clear the frame fitting like that. So I right click fitting and I choose the clear frame fitting options, and I've chosen that already now. So I'll go into the frame fitting options, and it will say 0, 0, 0, 0, and it will not have anything up here. But if I had not cleared that option, it would say some specific measurements down here. So the area that's important here is actually to figure out, will your magazine, your articles, when you put pictures inside of the image frames, will the pictures resize themselves to fit the box? And yeah, you can choose for them to fit 3 different ways. Well, actually also none. None will mean that you'll have to do all the resizing yourself, but you can also tell it to resize for you. So you can either choose for to fit the content to frame. That means that it will scale non-proportionally. I would rather that you choose one like fit content proportionally, because that way you don't get an image that has been scaled unproportionally, or you fill the frame proportionally. This is most likely the one that most of you will choose, because this will actually fill out the entire frame, whereas this will, the second one, fit content proportionally, will typically have some white areas, some parts of the image that's some areas that is pure white, because it's scaling itself to be exactly inside of the box, and that will often leave white spaces. So often fill frame proportionally will be what you want, because something will need to be going outside of the image box, so not the entire picture is showing. But it's up to you which one of these 2 you choose. It will be typically one of these 2 that you choose. In general, don't choose this one unless you want to mess your picture up. So I'll just choose this one and click OK, and I'll just go down and do the same for this picture, and simply just clear the frame fitting options. If I haven't done this, if I had put a picture in here before, you'll notice that the frame fitting options will already say some different values, and I don't want that. I want to be sure that it fits just generically based on this frame fitting option, fit content proportionally or fill frame proportionally. That way, if I use this down in one of my physical pages, I'll just go down to my physical pages. I was doing this change was done to my A master. So if I go down to my pages inside of my document now and unlock one of these boxes, notice that they are locked because they are sent from the A master. So all of these master page items will be locked. I can't get a hold of any of them unless I hold down Shift Command on a PC, that's Shift Control, and then click the object like that. So that shift command, remember that that's something you always need to remember when using InDesign and using master pages inside of InDesign. Shift command click to open up items from the master page. And I'll just open up this frame as well. And then you'll notice if I put an image in here, I'll just find an image and I'll put it in here. You'll notice that it will resize itself. So it's not, whoops, sorry. And I'll just place one in here as well. Let's take this one. And you'll notice that it will resize itself. So in this case, that the left and right edge goes all the way out to the image frame, but the top and bottom has some of the picture hidden. And then of course I'll just move that part so I'm sure that the head of the person is shown. You know, that it makes no sense if I can't see the head of the person. Yeah, and of course I'll also consider, is my caption text visible? But that's not part of this exercise. And likewise, this image right here, you'll see that it also fits the right edge and the left edge. It's hard to see because it's showing in white, but you can see out here that it's exactly the correct placement of the right edge. But some of the picture is going outside this area, so you can actually move the picture around. And just to be sure that I'm moving it around correctly, I'm holding down shift. That way I'm making sure that I don't accidentally move it outside of the image frame area. So hold down shift while moving it, and that way we make sure that we're not moving anything outside of the image area. And you're not supposed to do this, but you know, if I wanted this picture to look like she's looking at the text, I could just flip horizontal like that, and that might require me to actually put my reference point to the left and then flip it, or actually just put it to the center and then flip it like that. And that way we'll have the person looking to the left towards the text and also towards the trees. So yeah, okay. So that's how to format your image frames. So it's going to save you a lot of time when actually placing images inside of your document pages, if you already made these image frame settings correct on the master page, because then it's going to be the same settings on your document pages. So you can just easily place a picture in that frame and it will fit itself to that frame, image frame, proportionally. Okay, so again, these document pages are just for testing. In the end, I'll end up clearing a lot of the stuff I made on this master page. It's just so I can test it down on these these document pages. Okay, so the next thing we would like to do is actually make more master pages, because this setup right here, and this actually looks awful on the left page, but on the right page it looks like it's getting somewhere. This is something that looks like it could actually be used, whereas the left page has not been made visually as stimulating as the right page. But this exercise is not about making both left and right page visually stimulating. So I hope you can, look past that the left page doesn't look as nice as the right page. Okay, so, but this is supposed to be our general article page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename my A master to article, A article. So to do that, I'll right click my A master and I'll choose master options for A master. And then I'm going to rename it to A article. That also makes sense, that it's an A for article. So this way I actually have a way of remembering, okay, this master page is actually what I normally use for my articles. Well, okay, then perhaps I'll have a master page that I use for my, I don't know, my adverts. Okay, so to do that, I'll create a new master. I'll simply say new master, and I'll call this add, perhaps even add, so I remember that it's advert, and I'll simply call it advert down here. Perhaps this is gonna be full size adverts that has no page numbering on them, so it doesn't have to remember what's on the left and what's on the right. This can be used both on the left and on the right. So in this case, I'll just write number of pages 1, because this can be used sometimes on left, sometimes on right, and I'll just click OK to that. So this advert page perhaps does not need any margins, because all it needs is actually just to have one huge image frame. So I'm going to delete the margins from this one. I'm going to go to layout, margins and columns. I'm just simply going to write 0 in my margins. And instead I'm going to drag one huge image box, and I'm going to tell this image box, right click it, fitting and frame fitting options. I'm going to tell it that it needs to fill the frame proportionally, or fill the content proportionally. This most likely should already be a commercial that has been made in A4 format. So most likely you will just be able to choose fit content proportionally, and it should fill it out. Because it's made in the same size, so there should be no white areas, and likewise if I choose fill frame proportionally, it should not have areas sticking outside the frame, because commercials made for an A4 page are already made in A4 size. So your customer who wants to make advertisement in your magazine, you already informed them that it's A4 size, so they will send the commercial for you in A4 size. So then it should automatically fit this size, and you'll just click OK. So if I wanted, let's say, after my article, I actually wanted page 4 to be an advert, I could simply just drag my advert master page down onto page 4, and you'll notice suddenly that page 4 then becomes this advert page. And thus I could just put an advert in here. I'm just gonna unlock this again. Unlocking master page objects on your document pages is Shift Command clicking on them, and of course on a PC that's Shift Control clicking. And while it's unlocked, I'll simply just place an image, and this is not an advert, this is just some of the pictures that I shot of my girlfriend. So this is, let's suppose this is an advertisement. So that way you actually have two different masters next to each other, and you're still using your article master for the right page, but you actually choose to have an advert inside of the article. The article is not yet it's not interrupted. It's still flowing. So you see that it could still be the same article, whereas there's just a commercial inside of that article somewhere. So I could just click to create some more article pages, and you'll notice that so we have this ongoing article where there's a commercial in the middle of this article. Of course, I would also be sure that it's located on the right layer, and yes it is, because I created it on the right layer inside of my master page, this image frame. Okay, so next off, perhaps I also have some different types of articles. So perhaps I actually have some articles that are using the same grid and using the same generic layout as my regular A article. So in order to create a new article master page layout, which is based on my A article layout, I'll simply just create a new master, and I'll tell it that it's based on my A article master. That means it's going to take all these informations from my A article master and put them on the new master. So everything's going to be there. It's already designed. and perhaps I'll call this, I don't know, AA or A2. Just don't mix that up with size, but this is article 2, or it could also be, you know, lifestyle. So I could call this life or LA, like lifestyle article, like that, and click OK. Of course, this will be 2 pages because an article always have a left and a right page. So I'll just click OK to that, and notice that this extra master called LA lifestyle article will have all the same properties and appearance as my A article. And also notice that if I do make changes to my A article, like I'm going to change this, it will update my LA lifestyle article. So this LA lifestyle article will have these updates. So immediately when I make changes on the A article, I'm just going to click undo. Immediately when I make changes up there, it will also update and make the changes down here. So what's special about having an article master which is based on another? Well, the special thing about it is that you could actually make changes to this one. Let's say the only thing different about this lifestyle article section is actually that it's green, that this header section right here is green instead of blue. And notice first of all that if I want to unlock these items, it's like when you use a master down in the document pages, you need to unlock them by holding down Shift and Command and then clicking. Likewise, if you get information from another master, if you flow information from your A article down to the LA life article master, you will need to unlock these objects. So you'll need to Shift Command click on, let's say, the text right here, and Shift Command click on the bar right there. And if I don't Shift Command click on the text, you see what happens. Shift Command click on the bar will hide the text, because items that are located, that comes from the master pages, will always be below unlocked items. So in order for me to actually be able to see the text, I need to unlock the text as well. So master page objects, when they are located on the same layer as something else, the master page objects will always be below these other objects which has been unlocked. So it's a good idea to unlock both items in this case. Otherwise the text would be hiding beneath this box. Okay, so perhaps the only change to this lifestyle article is that it's actually green instead of blue, and perhaps a tint of 80%. And of course I would need these attributes to be applied down here as well, with the page numbering, and that means I need to also unlock the page numbering. And simply just change that to green with these 2 blue boxes. And as I recall, it was green with 80% tint. And that way we have a master page which looks different. So let's say that our sports section was supposed to start on page 9. We're just going to have one more advert. So we're going to, on page 8, we're going to have an advert, and on page 9 our new article spread will start. So I'm just going to place my article spread for my separate master down on page 9, and then I can just, you know, continue creating even more spreads. So that's how to use separate spreads that has different design, and you know, it's up to your imagination to figure out where does this end, you know, because each and every master can have its own design, and depending on which type of content in your magazine you have, the more or less master pages you will need. Of course, it's also an important thing in a magazine to also have, you know, master pages for your editorial letter and your table of content and so on, and perhaps also for advertisements which spreads over 2 pages, perhaps advertisements which fills out only half a page, so you can also have article text and so on, but at least figure out which master pages are relevant to make inside of your magazine. And the best way to figure out how others do this is actually by looking in magazines made by others, and then you'll notice that there are different sections of the magazine where they use different types of templates, different types of master pages. And so this was just a short exercise in how to create these master pages. It's up to you to figure out how many you'll need and for which parts of the magazine you'll need them. Okay, so let's say that you're supposed to at some point export this. I'm just gonna add one last page, because you need, if this is gonna be on Glueback, if this document is gonna be on Glueback, you'll need to make sure that the amount of pages inside of the document needs to be equal, needs to be able to be divided by 2, because when printing and putting the paper down in your spine of the magazine, there will be on one page, there will be print on both the front of the page and the back of the page. So that means it needs to be able to be divided by 2. If you have an uneven number of pages, let's say 13 pages, there will be white on the back of the last page because you forgot to make a page number 14. So when printing, when making this for Glueback, a spine which has glue in it, and putting those papers down into that spine, you will need to have it divisible by 2, divided. You should be able to divide it by 2. The amount of pages. This is unlike what people are used to when making it for stapling it. When stapling it, it needs to be divisible, dividable by 4 instead, because you both have print on not just the pages next to each other, but also on the back of the paper for each page next to each other. So that's actually 4 facing pages you need to have to represent one piece of paper when it's made for stapling. But I assume that most of you, and actually I encourage most of you to be doing this for a regular magazine, which means that it will be using Glueback spine. You'll glue the pages into the cover spine. If let's just assume that you are actually printing. You will of course not be printing this because of COVID-19, but normally you would be printing this at school and actually showing us how your prototype would look when it's glued into your cover. Okay, so I'm just talking a lot right now. So how will we actually export this? So of course I would make sure that all my master pages looks as they're supposed to. Right now there's just a lot of random text here. I would probably make my layout more as if it's supposed to be, but in this case let's just say this is how it's supposed to be. Well, okay, if I'm happy with that, even though there's really long columns of text, I would of course normally put these text columns up in at least 2 columns on one page, but let's just ignore all the layouting which could be done better, and instead focus on how should we export this. So if I want to export this, there's 2 things we should export to. One thing is for print, exporting it correctly to print. And so we know that we can send this to a print house and they'll make this correct when creating this magazine. So people receiving the magazine will have something that's, really beautiful to look at, and it's because it's printed correctly. And the other thing we'll need to know how to export to is exporting this to digitally, to be able to show this on screen. So how do we do that? We go into File and we choose export, and this is not considering how to export it if you're stapling it. If you're stapling it, this is, you would already have learned on first semester how to export it for stapling, most likely in Regis classes. But since this is made for glueback like a regular magazine is, we'll be seeing how to export it correctly for glueback, but also how to export it correct for digital viewing. So File, Export, and I'll simply choose for this to, I'll give it a name, testing for print. Yes. Okay, so I'll click Save, and in order for it to be correct for print, I'll need to change it to page export as pages, not as spreads, because then you'll have a problem. If you export it as spreads, you'll have a problem because when you cut out the pages, you'll need, if you export it as spreads, that's two-facing pages, you'll actually need them to be entirely different locations in the magazine. Page 1 would be next to page 16, page 2 would be next to page 15, and so on. And that's only for when you're using stapling. If you're stapling it, hvis man bruger hæfteklammer. I was just talking to the Danish students. But in this case, we're making it for glueback, so you'll export it as pages, meaning that page 1 and page 2 will come out in print together, and page 3 and 4 will come out in print together. Page 5 and 6 will come out in print together. You know, if you print duplex, they will be on the front and back of each other's paper if you choose pages. We won't be talking about this stuff. You already know this from Regis class. So we'll just be focusing on this part, the part of clicking the right thing in here, pages. And of course, you'll need to, if it's for print, to switch on all the relevant printer marks. And of course, you'll also, since you've been using time on using the bleed edge, of course, you will be using the document bleed settings. So that would be totally waste of time if you didn't switch on these things. And sometimes some of you actually remember to switch this on, but you forget to switch this on. And that actually means that it will not show anything that's been put outside the document's edge. So that means if you made anything on the bleed area, it will not be shown in the PDF. So of course, be sure to switch that on so it actually shows the items you put out across the bleed edge. And then you export. You simply export. And we'll just look at the differences between these two in a second. So this was the first test. I'm going to export the other as well, so we can just check them out at once, at the same time, I mean. So the other one was called something with testing. What did I call it? Testing for print. Okay, so this is testing for digital preview. And here, when I click save, instead I'll choose for it to be spreads. And one thing that I would like not to see when it's shown digitally is, of course, that I don't need all these stupid marks. That's just annoying if you're trying to watch a magazine digitally, if there's all of these different marks located on. And one thing that's important for me to say to you is actually, I recommend that you hand in both files, both the file which is made for print, but also the file which is made for digital viewing. That makes it much better for me when I'm viewing your file to see how the flow is, and I'm not interrupted by all of these crop marks and bleed marks and so on. Whereas I also want to go and check your print file to see if you set it up correctly for print. So it's a great idea to hand in both files, one for digital viewing and one for seeing if you saved it correct for print. But for the digital view file, of course, I'll switch these things off because they'll just be annoying to watch if you're trying to, read the articles and so on. But the most important thing here was set it to spreads and switch off these marks and bleed. And that way it's still I'm actually still saving it for print. So I'm not exporting it for interactivity or anything like that. I'm still exporting it for print, but I just switch off these things that are not relevant. Of course, I could save it to become smallest file size, but I'll just keep it high quality print. But you can change the quality settings or change the compression of the images, for example, if you want it to become smaller. But the most important thing is spreads and no crop marks or bleed. And we'll just click export, and then we'll look at how this magazine looks. So I'm just going to go to my desktop, and we'll just see testing for digital and testing for print. And if I open these two up, you'll notice that the testing for print, I'm just going to zoom out, will have them coming in the 1, 2, 3 fashion. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's no page numbering because that was a commercial. The master page did not include page numbering. 5, 6, 7, and so on. And this is how it's supposed to be when making it for print, when making it for glue, a spine which uses glue. The two pages, page 1 and 2 will be connected, page 3 and 4 will be connected, and so on. That's going to be, when you print a duplex, page 1 has page 2 on the back of the paper. Okay, so the digital preview is going to look different. The first page is going to be shown alone, and that's because the first page would normally actually be interpreted as the cover of the magazine. But then the next pages will be shown as the spreads that they're supposed to be shown as, and it will go on like that through the entirety of the magazine, and that just makes it much more viewable. And I'll just click full screen, and you'll notice that if you're seeing this in full screen, it just looks much better as you're scrolling through the content and reading the articles, that you actually see the two pages next to each other as if you're reading a magazine in your hand, if you're holding the magazine in your hand. So that's the two different way of exporting, depending on if it's for print, for a magazine print, or if it's for preview on screen. And you see it's much more beautiful as well to view this layout without the crop marks. Whereas if I want to see how it was, if it was correctly set up for print, of course, then it's important that I can see these crop marks. So in the print file, you'll need these. In the digital version, you won't. It simply looks much better to see it without, if it's for reading. Okay, so I think we're approaching the end. There are just two more things, which is to save this as a template. So actually I could just delete all of these pages down here. These were just, these are actually made by just using these masters, and I just used them for testing. So actually right now I can just delete any of these pages. I will of course need to have at least one page. InDesign does not work without one page. So I'm just gonna pull down the content of a non-master and just delete whatever the content is right here. So this way I actually cleared my document pages while still having my master pages, the ones that I created. And my master pages has the design I need, has the grids that I need, has whatever I need to begin working with my articles. So how do I save this template then? So everyone in my group can use these and thus have the same master pages, the same grids, the same paragraph styles, and so on and so on and so on. Well, what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'll save this on my computer. That's just a good thing to do, to remember to save now and then. But the second thing I'll do is actually save this as a template. So I'll go into my InDesign and I'll just save this as my InDesign template and call this, I don't know, article standard, I don't know, or perhaps just call it my magazine template It's really okay. The trick is not for me to tell you what to call your file. So you can just call it whatever you want, but just make sure that it saves as a template. And you know what? The great thing about saving as a template is, we've talked about this before, but the great thing about saving as a template is that if I open it up later on, um, let me just find it. You see, if I open up a template later on, click open right here, you'll notice that it will name itself Untitled 7 when you open it, or Untitled 8 or Untitled 9 or whatever. So that way you cannot accidentally save on top of the template. So you can never erase your template accidentally by saving on top of it. You can still erase it from your computer, but you can't save on top of it accidentally. You will have to purposely go into save as and save on top of it, and save an InDesign template on top of it to wipe it out. So you have to intentionally want to delete it to actually delete that document. So that a lot of you have troubles because you sometimes accidentally save on top of a file that was supposed to be your template. Well, just if it is a template, then save it as a template, close the file, and then open it again, and it will open as an untitled document. That way in the future you will not accidentally save on top of your template. So that's just a suggestion for you, which will, I promise you, this tip, if you follow it, will help you in the future not to save the files that you don't want to accidentally remove parts from files that you don't want something removed from. Okay. That being said, you all have now all the master pages being prepared up here, and you have the paragraph styles prepared, you have the character styles prepared, you have the setup for your baseline grid inside of grid. You already prepared your baseline grid to be 15 point in increment and start at the top of your margin and so on. So all of these different settings that you created have now been remembered by InDesign. Actually, it would probably be a good idea if the text wrap you included also was in the master page. Oh, it was already. So I think this is actually a great way of showing you how how you could prepare your template for designing in InDesign. Okay, so one last thing. I promise you, this is the very last thing I'll say today, which is how to make a flat plan inside, a digital flat plan inside of InDesign. And I'm just gonna actually repeat a lot of pages. So I'll just say, let's say 100 pages. Boom. I just created 100 pages down in this document because I want to make a flat plan, which is an overall view of what's inside of my document. And okay, so there's two different types of flat plans. There's the one for your style guide, which shows the flow of your magazine. That's one type of flat plan. The one that I'm showing now how to create is the digital flat plan, which you're supposed to hand in for before evaluation. Okay, so you see there's already actually kind of a flat plan in the pages panel here. I just stretched my page panel out. So this is actually almost like a flat plan. But just so I'm able to see all of these pages at once, I'll go into my burger menu and I'll simply go to the view pages and choose for it to be shown horizontally instead. And thus all the pages will be shown next to each other instead. And I'll just drag out my page panel so I'm able to see even more. And okay, so this is really great. So if I had 103 pages in my magazine, and it should actually be an even number it ends on, but let's say it was, well, then I could actually, so this is actually my flat plan. This is showing what is on top of, on every page. And if I wanted to be shown even bigger, I could go to my burger menu once again, go to view, panel options, and I could choose for the pages, the pages to be jumbo size. and I'll just choose my masters to be small so they don't fill too much of my panel. And you'll see now, you can really see what's going on in each of these pages. So this is huge pages, and perhaps I could drag it even bigger so you can see what's going on here. Okay, so to create a digital flat plan, of course, this would be different for you. You won't just have copies of the same page. It would be all of the different articles you created in your magazine. And then you would actually only need to make a screenshot. So I'm going to click Shift Command 4, that's on a Mac, Shift Command 4, and I'll click and drag and get a screenshot of my flat plan, my digital flat plan. And then we have an overview of what the 40 first pages is about in my magazine. Of course, this flat plan should show everything. So if it's not showing everything, I would change my pages, my panel options to be not jumbo size, but extra large. And then I'll simply take a screenshot of, I'll take a screenshot of this. And here we have my digital flat plan. Yeah, that's one way of doing it. There is also another way of doing it, actually several ways of doing it, but this is the fastest one to do it, by actually taking a screenshot of your pages panel. When I'm done with this, I'll of course set my view page to vertical again, so it's easier to orient myself when I make my pages panel small again. Yeah, I think actually that's about it. I covered all the topics on my paper. Fantastic. So that means now that the last thing that I would like you to research yourself, I'm just going to write that on this page right here, and I'm actually going to write it using my paragraph style. Yeah. So I'll use my header, and I'll actually move this header up here because right now I don't like the order of it. So, okay, so I'll write in my header right here, with my header text, I'll write stuff that you should figure out yourself is, for example, if you want to learn about table of contents, you could search for that on Google or YouTube or LinkedIn Learning. Also, if you're making these articles separately with each of your own InDesign documents, I recommend that you search on the topic book files in InDesign, because that's the file type you can create inside of InDesign to connect InDesign documents. So if you made an article of 7 pages in one document and an article of 8 pages in a separate document, you could connect those two, and InDesign would interpret them as being the same document, even though it's 2 separate documents. And that's actually often a way that books and magazines are actually gathered in the end, a lot of separate files being connected by one book file. So I recommend that you search on the topic book files. Table of content is also relevant to, especially if you're making interactive magazines, which is not the case for this magazine, but still handy to know something about table of contents, how to make those interactive inside of InDesign. I think that's it for now, and I think you should take all of the things that I've been discussing with you today and just figure out how you can use that to either update your style guide or how to use them to get started with your magazine design. So thank you for listening and still being alive after so many hours of teaching. Let's stop the video.